Is it necessary to heal yourself before committing service to others? Yes. The answer is 100% yes, but not 100% healed. In this video, I'm going to be expanding on that question and giving you 6 specific areas of self-healing, which I want you to be more or less fully integrated within until you become that incredible coach, that terrific therapist, or even the wonderful friend who's emotionally equipped to deal with the challenges and traumas of your family and friend network. Let's go deeper into the question, because this is one of my favorite areas to go into, both in terms of self-reflection and also helping coaches and clients and teachers and other people who do similar work to me. Expanding on the question, is it possible, reasonable, and or useful to help others whilst you are still unhealed and have unfinished inner work? It is possible, but the honest reality, I'm not going to lie to you, you won't be a very good helper if you haven't helped yourself first. This is something that I can really relate to, and maybe we can all relate to this. I'll expand actually on the question a little bit more. I relate to this feeling. I feel compelled to help others, especially through emotionally difficult times, but I'm also very aware that I'm still in the process of wiping my eyes. I know an answer to this would relate to each individual, very true, and their circumstances, but perhaps I have some thoughts. I have many thoughts. In fact, I have 7 books I'm going to share with you right at the end. You can skip there if you're impatient, but I recommend you watch the rest of the video beforehand, or you can just go straight to the books, because honestly, they're going to give you more than I'm going to give you in the next 15 minutes. 6 areas of self-inquiry that I want you to consider, written on my wonderful little post-it note. I want you to be at least 90% healed in these areas of personal growth and personal healing. If you're not 90% healed, you're probably not the right professional helper for particular coaching, teaching, and therapeutic challenges. I'm weaving them all in together because there's a real overlap in that space. But of course, there are many nuances and many specific areas of interest. So please just relate it to your individual situation. And also, if you're not a professional helper, you can consider this video as a way to be a better friend or a better father, a better mother, and just have a bit more emotional attunement and know how to get the most out of your emotionally charged conversations and be the best person that you can for the people who need you. 6 topics of conversation, and I want you to be at least 90% healed in all of these areas to be truly good enough in terms of professional helping. They get more intense as we go, but let's go straight into it. First area that I want you to be healed in before you can really help other people, it's your mommy issues and your daddy issues. The majority of work that I've done with clients, at least for 1 or 2 weeks in a row, if not an entire mentorship, is related to a mommy issue, a daddy issue, or a confusing mixture of the two. If I was in there in the session or throughout the 4-month mentorship and I hadn't resolved either the understanding, the acceptance, or the forgiveness as that pathway goes deeper, my mother and father wounds, I would be triggered in most instances of relatable feedback. What I mean by that is, say for example, I'm going to make up an example that doesn't relate to me. I have a mother issue of having a very hardworking, ambitious career mother, and she was always flying around the world, and I never get to spend any time with her. That wasn't my literal mom, I'm making something up. If I had that experience and I had an abandonment wound related to the experience of my mother being more interested in business and career and not interested in little old Jordan, I'd be extremely triggered in the situations where I'm encountering clients who have mothers or fathers who are very business driven and didn't spend much time with them. It would be a constant re-traumatization and a triggering at the very least of my own abandonment wound, because I haven't taken the months and years to properly release my own family baggage. You can see how this issue applies throughout all of the themes I'm going to bring up. Just one example there. If you've got mommy issues and daddy issues, and you've got seething resentments and overall uncertainties about your relationship with your parents, both historically, in the present, and in the future, you're probably not the right person to do focused work around family. That's not a criticism of you, it's just an honest look at the situation. What I want you to be in, and this is the number 1 principle for all 6 of these points, I want you to be touched, but not triggered. To be touched, but not triggered by your client, your student, or your friend. You can be touched by their story of, hey Jordan, my mom, she was never there for me. She always was flying around the world. She worked for a big charity and she had an incredible public career, but she just never had the time for me. And honestly, I know this is affecting my relationship with my husband or with my wife, because whenever they go away for a trip, I just I get weird and I start doing things that are really out of character and I don't know what to do about it. What should I do? You can be touched by that. If I've healed my own wound around my mom flying around the world and me not getting time with her, I can deeply relate to that issue, and I'd arguably be in one of the best positions to be able to give a real, genuine, embodied, empathic response and say to Mr. or Mrs. Client, you know, if it feels comfortable for you to receive this, I have a few personal stories I could share because I actually relate to this, and maybe that'd be useful for you to hear about how I've worked through this process. And most people are going to say, yes, please, I'd love to know how you've literally resolved this, not just theoretically resolved it, how you've literally gotten better. You're touched, but you're not triggered. You're touched by their pain. You remember what it was like, but you're not triggered back into the pain. That one principle, apply it throughout all the 6 areas that we're going to go into. That's a good indication for should you go further. And the same issue again for daddy issues, mommy issues, grandfather, grandmother, brother and sister, but trying to simplify down into a single video. Just pay attention to family issues. Second point that I want you to consider, this is one which you really need to work through. It's issues of dating and intimacy and the word beginning with S, which I don't want to say too often on YouTube because it limits how far this video gets on the internet. You need to be able to sit in very explicit conversations in a wide variety of intimate settings and be able to be touched but not triggered. And this is something which I really want you to look at from both a practical and also a personal preference perspective. I am a straight male. I've worked with straight men, straight women, single, married, divorced, people in interesting alternative arrangements, and I've also worked with gay men and gay women. I've worked with a variety of religious backgrounds as well, and I've worked with a variety of people who have had a certain religious background and then gone in a certain direction with their preferences towards intimate situations, and other people in very different situations who've stayed in that situation. I've seen different stories across the board. I've been in situations with clients where I have spent more or less the majority of the mentorship looking at issues of intimacy and expression, and especially the areas where things went wrong when they're looking back on mistakes that they made in their 20s, even though it's been 15, 20, 25 years, they're telling me explicitly about issues around things like working in adult entertainment, or being way too promiscuous and having damaging experiences, contracting issues like diseases and medical complications, going through stages of experimentation where maybe there's a straight man who tries something different or a gay woman who tries something different, and they want to share stories with you that they've never shared with other people because you've built the trust. Imagine if I had my unhealed wounds. Imagine if I couldn't listen to a conversation because I'm a straight man of a gay male client talking about his gay relationship because it wouldn't work for me personally based on my preferences. I wouldn't be the right teacher, therapist, coach, friend for that person. Doesn't mean that I'm discriminating actively against them. It's just an honest conversation during the screening process. If you know yourself, if you know that certain intimate issues are touching into triggering, and it's a firm boundary that you just have maybe a religious reason for not working with a certain type of person, that's completely okay in my perspective. I'm not part of a licensed professional body or any institution that would force me to work with a certain type of client where it would clearly be very bad work together. But you can make those decisions if you have the freedom to make those decisions, and it's something which really truly you need to be at least 90% integrated in. You can have your strong preferences. You can have your own personal history. You can have your own values that you extend into the future. But just know that when it comes to intimacy, it is one of the most intimate issues that any possible client will share with you. And you need to be able to respond in the appropriate way and also be able to encourage their individuation and their self-actualization, while paradoxically also being with clients as they're trying to reorient and re-navigate, which is a lot of the work that you'll be doing. You'll be working with someone who starts over here and then moving over here, or someone that's here and they're going over there and to track their progress over many months because you understand the wider variety of intimate expression. But just be aware that you will be hearing a lot of bedroom stories, and that might be titillating for some people who've never worked in a therapeutic environment. You might think that, oh, I can't wait to hear everyone's private behind the scenes. When you go deep enough into this work, that is nowhere near the feeling that you come with, because you're not listening to the literal ins and outs of the conversation. You're asking questions about, okay, that happened, especially if it's a situation that's more traumatic, that happened here. What's the story around it? What's the inner story? Where do we frame this in the context of your life? You're not hung up on the moment of intimacy, let's say. So simultaneously be able to relate, or be able to hold that compassionate touch but not triggered stance, and also not get fixated and become so fascinated in issues of intimacy because you haven't got enough intimate experience yourself. Wide variety of topics there. I'm not saying that you need to, having slept with 100 people or something like this to be able to relate to intimacy. It's just a broad conversation, and you'll know within yourself, are you 90% healed and integrated and confident in your expression, but also have the space to be able to meet people where they're at. Just keep it in mind. Third issue that I want you to consider for your self-healing, this is the issue of money trauma and money wounds. One of the most unfortunate situations I have seen on a monthly basis over the last few years is people messaging me who've got master's degrees and PhDs in psychology, counseling, or a therapeutic modality, and they are broke. They've got no money because they spent 5 figures, some cases 6 figures, in certain countries in the world, 4 5-year degrees. They've spent a massive amount of money learning how to make money and be effective as a therapist or a certain type of coach or a counselor, and now they're in a situation where they've got no income and they're trying to earn a living by helping people with sensitive issues, but you then need to try and get money, but also money-related sensitive issues creates a bit of a sticky spot, and how do you then market yourself to be able to be a good professional when you can't pay for the rent? That's something which is very challenging, and it deserves an entire video in itself. But if you're in a literal situation where you haven't got enough money to be able to pay the rent and pay the bills and have a modest standard of life, you're going to be in very subconsciously charged situations in regards to the income which comes from your clients. And it's a particular type of hell that most beginner therapists, coaches, and teachers have to go through to some degree, unless you're very fortunate and had a massive trust fund. I didn't have that. I understand what it's like to build your practice over years and start from a small fee, which then gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you get more and more experience. That's a very normal pathway. But if you have literal financial challenges, you might not be a good person to work with. If you have massive debt, if you have massive money issues, if you have stories around money and you have stories around scarcity rather than what I believe to be the most useful stance, which is a default optimism, you have financial literacy, you have systems in place, you have investment strategies, you understand what it means to relate to money in a variety of different contexts, you can work with people. For example, my clientele, just broadly over the last 4 years, I've worked with people who are on unemployment benefit and they've received a certain amount of money through one means or another, and they've got the money to be able to afford me, or they're just completely unemployed, but they wanted to work with me and they had the money, they chose to work with me. I've also worked with people who are C-suite executives making multiple 6 figures per year. I think in some cases a handful of people who are making over $1 million per year, not the richest of the rich, but still very wealthy individuals. I've worked with the full spectrum. Full-time business individuals, more artistic individuals, more spiritually focused individuals, people who don't care too much about money. I need to be able to relate to different money stories. I need to be able to relate to the man or woman who's looking to scale up their business from high 6 figures into 7 figures and believe in them. I also need to be able to relate to the person who wants to downplay money in their life and have a more spiritual, earthy, and embodied experience where money is secondary and they free up the time as their primary currency. There's so many different ways to work with people in regards to money. You just need to make sure that you haven't got money wounds and you're touched but not triggered. Don't be in a situation where your very wealthy client is sharing about their financial progress and you feel all insecure and jealous because you've got a vulnerability around not making enough money yourself. It creates a really bad dynamic, and likewise, don't be condescending or shame-based or something like this towards people who don't prioritize money. Meet people where they're at. Let's move on to the fourth point. This is a broad point, but hopefully we can keep it quite short. The issue of drugs and substances. I'm personally 5 years sober at the time of recording this video, but I still can relate to the experience of wanting to go and have an alternative experience, maybe doing psychedelics or wanting to drink or wanting to get high. I understand why people would want to do that. For me personally, I have boundaries in my business where sobriety is a minimum, non-negotiable standard for working with me for 4 months, because I realize that my tendency is create that very difficult boundary which needs to be almost a binary switch. I mean, it is a binary switch. Are you sober or are you not? Do you still drink and get high, and do you want to go and do party drugs? Or do you want to join me in this intimate and very intense 4-month container where I truly believe, based on my experience, that you'll go further, faster, and to a deeper level of safety if you ignore all of those things, at least for this 4-month period? And thankfully, I've had people who've gone sober at the start of the mentorship, and I still hear from them 2-3 years later that they've maintained their sobriety because it was so transformative. They got a series of experiences that were soberly contained, and they just wanted it to keep going. This applies to situations that aren't even just literal drugs. It can be things like adult websites or gambling addictions, any type of addictive property. Doesn't mean that you need to be completely free of all addictions to do effective work. I'm very transparent on the internet that I still struggle with screens. I struggle while working online and while being on social media with the curious and scrolling thumb, spending too much time on shorts, too much time on reels. It's not horrific, and I still take 4 days offline, but it's still a thing that I'm learning. But I'm learning how to spend a bit less time on my phone rather than having hangovers in client sessions or having issues related to whatever particular substance of choice. Make sure that you're 90% healed on this. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a saint. You could have a different relationship to alcohol, for example, to me, where you enjoy drinking a glass of wine a couple nights per week, and that's completely fine. But again, same principle, touched, not triggered, and establishing boundaries and rules within your therapeutic or teaching practice so that you can be better equipped to give a better experience to the kinds of people that you're meant to help. Let's move on to the fifth point. This is a point which is, well, not a point, it's one of the most important themes that any human could ask, and it's God. What's your relationship with God? What's your relationship with spirituality in general? Are you atheist? Are you theist? Which religious orientation are you most inclined towards? And how do you feel towards people who don't have that inclination? What would it be like for me? Let's say I'm a Muslim woman. I'm not a Muslim woman. Let's say I'm a Muslim woman and I'm tasked with working with an atheist man. Would that create an imbalance? How firm am I in my convictions about Islam? Or an alternative example, let's say I am a Christian man and I need to work with the Muslim woman. Can I make that work? If I'm an atheist, can I work with a theist? And vice versa. It's a really interesting existential and spiritual question that you have to sit with, because the majority of deep trauma healing can go so far, but then there's that faith component I've noticed in the majority of my mentorships. I don't think I've had a situation personally where I've worked with a client. Let me pause and think about this. Have I worked with an openly dogmatic, atheistic individual? I don't think so. I don't think I've worked with a militant atheist, because it's obvious when you see my videos online that I talk about God and I talk about faith and I talk about a generally spiritually imbued perspective of life. I just don't attract people. If someone's in a dogmatic atheist stage, they hear the word God and they clench up their fists and they just don't want to talk about it. Likewise, if someone is extremely dogmatic with their certain Abrahamic faith or any other religion, they're going to see the atheist and they're going to likewise be in this ridiculous shadow boxing dynamic. We're all human, we're all imbued with a spark of divinity, whether that be from God or just the nature of consciousness, and you can decide between you whatever might be happening, but don't bring it in to the therapy session. Make sure that you're not triggered by questions around God. Make sure that you feel comfortable having conversations about faith, because if you're working with people who've been through trauma, damage, abuse, and the most horrific experiences possible, and you're there in the session and they're telling you in detail how painful it was. And they say to you, honestly, Jordan, I didn't know what to do for many years, and what really got me through was prayer. How do you respond to that? If you're fundamentally atheistic, or they're praying in a different way compared to your religion, and you can't honor and acknowledge that, and you get touched and go into triggered, you're going to ruin the dynamic. You need to be able to work with people in their faith-based consciousness. It's a broad point. Every single point in this video could be an entire video in itself, but just make sure that you've resolved your major existential dread and your major financial, faith-based philosophies, and maybe give some money to the church or the synagogue if you want some financial reconciliation as well. That's up to you. I'm going to take a pause and take a drink of some coffee, and then we'll move on to the bonus point. The bonus point, number 6, the 6th area that you need to have reconciled so you can do effective work with your clients or your students, is the entire world of trauma. Your personal trauma needs to be 90% healed to be a world-class helper. You can be 80% healed and be good enough, but the specifics really are worth focusing on. For me personally, I have a history from between the age of 10 and about 22 of being very depressive and very dissociative towards derealization and depersonalization. I existed somewhere as a head kind of floating around here. I felt like everything was at a distance. I occasionally had these perspectives of seeing myself from third person. I was dissociated and disembodied because of what was for me as a child a difficult environment to grow up in. It wasn't safe enough for me. To not go into the details, it wasn't safe enough, and my spirit, as I see it, left my body, and until I resolved my major childhood issues, I didn't want to return to my body. Imagine me being in a session with you today, being out of my body, still being put together. You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. Here I am. I'm saying all my things. And it's like, oh yes, Mr. Client. And like writing down on my notes, and it all looks very professional and very well put together. But I'm somewhere off here over in the library. Awful work. It would not work. The same as if I was having a paranoid reaction, or I was having a manic depressive swing, or I was having some kind of collapse, or some kind of whatever it might be. It would be awful therapy, and it wouldn't be safe. You need, and I mean need, if you're going to be doing therapeutic work or deep coaching work that touches on sensitive issues, you can't be going into flashbacks and flooding to any degree of frequency. Yes, we're all human, that's why I'm saying 90%, but I think 95% is appropriate. There might be a moment, and there has been a moment, where a client shared something with me that feels like a mirror image to something that I've experienced, and I've said to them, honestly, I can feel the tears behind my eyes here. I'm so sorry this happened to you. This is awful. And if I can be honest with you, it's something that I likewise experienced. It's hard, isn't it? That's a real empathic moment. And people love that because it's real. It's not a theory. It's not fake. You're not playing it as a tactic or a trick. It's a real moment. It's very humanistic. And I'm going to go into these books and I'm going to share more on these moments in a moment. How many moments can we get in a single video? Therapeutic triggering can be appropriate and wonderful if it's a small percentage of the overall experience. Someone shares a wound that matches to your wound, and you have the capacity to be able to bring it up into the space while still primarily orienting yourself towards their emotional reality, and you ask for consent. This is bringing up emotions in me. Would this feel useful for you to hear a bit of my story related to this, so that you can maybe hear how I worked through this? Again, that same principle. Different organizations say you should never do that. I think it's ridiculous personally, which is why I don't go inside of those organizations. I think you should be able to have human-to-human conversations in a human-to-human way within those very particular examples. It can be powerful. Some of the most powerful work that I've done with clients who've gone through histories of abuse or histories of depression, dissociation, and honestly, those moments where you don't want to be here anymore. I was in that moment on an extended basis for about 12 years that I don't want to be here and I'm willing to not be here. That kind of energy. Now being out of that and being able to look back on that and feel the memory of that pain. Imagine how useful that is in a session. You attract people who come to you with a certain type of energy that they need, and if you represent that energy in the healthiest form, you will be a fantastic helper. But just make sure that you haven't got unresolved wounds which are bleeding out into the session in a very literal and symbolic sense. 6 areas to focus on: family, intimacy and dating, money, drugs and substances and addictions, God, and trauma overall. I hope this video has been helpful, and here's a bonus round for those who either skipped straight to the end or those who watched all the way through. Thank you for being here. These books will help you be a better therapist. I'm completely self-taught because I focused on spending my years healing myself in full depth and full capacity, and then learning from incredible therapists and teachers how to do it better, because honestly, if I'm going to be transparent, these books are some of the best books. I've got an entire shelf, about 40 books down here on therapeutic practice, and they're more useful, in my opinion, and based on the conversations I have with people who've gotten their master's degrees and PhDs in just theory, these ones are better. That's another video. There's about 10 different videos in this video. Read these books. I recommend you pick up at least 3 of them. Don't miss the moment. If you're touched by what I've shared in this video, these books are the teachers which I've turned to be able to have this philosophy of working with people. First one, The Art of Counseling by Rollo May. Incredible old school book. I think this one's maybe from the 50s or 60s. We've got a humanistic approach from John Rowan with Ordinary Ecstasy. This book is a practical breakdown of what it takes to be a great humanistic psychologist who's focused more on experience rather than diagnosis. There's Adolf Guggenbuhl-Craig, who I try not to say his name too often because it triggers the algorithm for obvious reasons, but Power in the Helping Professions, not to be confused with Power with the other man of this name. We're talking about Power in the Helping Professions, and this is about understanding the power dynamics within the therapeutic relationship and how to be aware of the situation but not take unintentional advantage, and just generally be a good support. I then got another John Rowan book. John Rowan is UK based and he's fantastic, but this one's for the men out there or those who are looking to work with men. Healing the Male Psyche. Fantastic book. This is one of the best books as a man working with men, or when I've recommended it to female coaches, clients, therapists, mix. You get the idea. This is an incredible book. It's one of the best books. Please buy it. We've got a more spiritually orienting book, which is Meta Skills, The Spiritual Art of Therapy. This book is a bit more out there, but if you're into esoteric and intuitive wisdom, then you're going to want to learn from Amy Mindell. She has got the meta skills that you need. You can tell that the video is wrapping up and got a bit of a dry mouth, so I'll just show these real quick. Born to Serve, you've seen me hold it before, by Susan Trout. Again, wonderful book about the shadow of service and what it takes to be an esoteric and intuitive and spiritually oriented practitioner. And the final book, one of my favorite books. It's a shame because all these books are fantastic. It's almost like I don't care, but they really are fantastic. The Living Classroom by Christopher Bach, which is about teaching fields and collective consciousness. This is a transpersonal psychologist who spent decades working with students and then analyzed his experience of how to teach within an organized university context and in a private group context to collectively distribute and nourish thought forms across your audience in a way where the ideas are maximally received. 7 books for you to read, 6 areas to focus on. If you enjoyed this conversation, leave a comment down below and share your stories and tips for other people who are trying to be even just great friends. It's been a difficult journey for you to get to this point in your moment of how deep you're going to go with this. So yeah, let's share our success stories and our tips down in the comments. And I'm going to once again rehydrate myself, not with coffee. Coffee's not rehydrating, that's my issue. I made the rookie mistake. I should have had some coconut water. Video's over. Read the books and be well.